Welcome back, deep divers. If you're here, you're probably like me. You want to know a lot about a lot, and you want to know it quickly. So let's get right into it.
Today's subject is a really fascinating one.
We're going deep, and I mean deep, into the world of Jewish gangsters in New York City, early to mid-20th century. And our main guide for this journey is going to be Richard Cohen's book, Tough Jews.
This is a side of organized crime. We talk a lot about organized crime in America on this show, but this is one that doesn't get as much attention, and for good reason.
Yeah.
It's a world of, it's a world of truly tough Jews, street thugs all the way up to some really sophisticated racketeers. And it really gives us this interesting window, like how did these guys navigate the whole immigrant experience? Because that was a huge part of this. And then there's like this pull, this almost magnetic pull towards power and wealth, and not the kind you find in like typical, quote unquote, legitimate society.
Right, exactly. So first things first, geographically, where are we talking about here? Where did all this go down?
We're talking about New York City, mostly Brooklyn, places like Bensonhurst, you got Brownsville, Williamsburg, and of course, over in Manhattan, the Lower East Side. These were more than just neighborhoods.
Right.
These were like the crucibles of immigrant communities, wave after wave coming in, trying to make it in America. And, Cohen, the author, he paints this really vivid picture of a specific type of setting that kept popping up.
Oh, really?
The half-light, known to all true delis, you can practically smell the pastrami.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't just about the food. It was like this in-between zone where deals went down, stories were swapped, that kind of thing. Like not quite in the shadows, not quite in the light.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess thinking about it, like these really close-knit immigrant communities, they could breed both like opportunity and desperation.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it's almost like they created this environment where these paths outside the mainstream could like take root.
Exactly. I mean, you come to a new country and those traditional paths to success, they might seem blocked, or just totally out of reach. So what happens? Well, different power structures pop up.
Yeah.
And sometimes, those structures are criminal enterprises.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about some of the people who like built this world. And I think a good place to start is Monk Eastman. Edward Osterman was his real name. And his story, it's not your typical gangster, like rags to riches kind of thing.
No.
He was middle class. He even owned a pet shop at one point. But then things changed. He becomes a bouncer and then a pretty well-known gangster in those early days. And here's the part that I always find so interesting about him. When he died in 1920, he was buried with full military honors.
Huh. I hadn't thought about that. That is kind of strange, isn't it? Full military honors for a known gangster. Like, what kind of connections did he have?
It really makes you wonder about the era, too. Like, what was going on back then that something like that could happen?
Yeah. Like, whose toes did he step on? Or maybe whose palms did he grease,
Maybe, right? So, big question here. Why did some Jewish immigrants, many of whom, were fleeing persecution in Europe, turn to crime? Cohen's book, it points to a few major factors.
Right.
Obviously, you have poverty. I mean, that's a huge driver. But there's also this idea, and it's a really powerful one, that these horrific pogroms that they lived through in Europe, they taught them a terrible lesson, how to die. But for some, that knowledge, that really grim knowledge, it got twisted, right? It flipped into this fierce determination to learn how not to die, to seize control, to not be a victim anymore.
Wow, yeah.
And then there's this sense, and I think this is key for a lot of them, this sense of having like nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
Which can be, it can be a dangerous motivator.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you've already faced the worst, right?
Okay.
The potential downsides, the risks of crime, they just seem so much smaller.
Right.
Because what's the worst that could happen? You've already seen the worst.
Exactly. So in these early days, the crimes, they're pretty basic. We're talking street fights, gambling dens, that kind of stuff. But over time, things start to change, and we see this shift towards more organized crime.
Right.
And that's where a really, really crucial figure comes in. Arnold Rothstein.
Oh, Rothstein, the so-called Moses of the underworld.
Yeah. And that nickname, it's not just for show. He really was a turning point in how organized crime developed in America. His vision, his way of running things, it was just on a different level.
Totally. Like, he brought this whole other level of sophistication to it all.
Yeah. And Cohen really highlights, like, his style, this really interesting blend of grace and violence, bluff and bravado.
Right. He wasn't just some, like, street tough. He was a thinker.
Exactly. He was a gambler, a really good one, and he had these connections that reached all the way into Broadway. There's this great story about him, actually.
Yeah.
The president of American Tobacco Company, this guy loses a ton of money to Rothstein in a card game.
Hmm.
It just shows you Rothstein could move in all these different worlds.
Oh, absolutely. And he saw that organized crime could be so much bigger than just, turf wars and petty stuff.
Yeah.
He saw it as this huge American enterprise,
Right.
run like a business, efficient, strategic, a total change from how things were done before.
So he wasn't just a visionary, he was a builder, too.
Hmm.
He started recruiting young guys, Jewish and Italian, and he saw that they had a lot in common. Pragmatic, willing to work together, especially against the Irish gangs who were already established.
Right, right. That alliance, the Jewish and Italian gangsters, it was huge. It really shook up the power structure in the underworld.
And Rothstein's story ends in a very Rothstein kind of way, shot after a poker game.
Of course.
And he famously refused to name his killer. He just said, I'll take care of it.
Classic.
Very dramatic exit.
It really fits, though.
Right.
That whole code of silence, that I'll handle my own business mentality, that was Rothstein to the T. But of course, when a figure like that disappears, it leaves a void.
And that void, it gets filled by, well, one of the most infamous names in organized crime, Murder Incorporated.
Yeah.
Just the name itself is chilling.
Yeah. It really gets to the point, doesn't it? And this gang, mainly Jewish, they were into everything. Rackets, bootlegging, shylocking, you name it, they were probably doing it.
And Cohen, he actually has a personal connection to this part of the story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his mother's grandparents, they owned a diner. And it became this, like, unofficial hangout for Murder, Inc.
Oh.
A shrine to their bravado is how he puts it. And Louis Lepke, who we'll talk about more later, he was a regular, always sat in the back booth. It just kind of shows you, like, how this whole underworld was woven into the fabric of everyday life.
Yeah. It's like these guys, they weren't just these mythical figures, they were part of the community. In a very twisted way, of course.
Right. And Murder, Inc. was full of these larger-than-life, well, maybe terrifying-than-life characters. You had Abe Kid Twist reelers,
Yeah.
ambitious, a natural leader, and utterly ruthless. The book talks about his war with the Shapiro brothers, and there's this one detail that always sticks with me. He shoots Meyer Shapiro right through the ear.
Through the ear.
Right through the ear.
I mean, it's not just about killing, is it?
No.
It's a message. It's about sending a message, loud and clear.
Then there's Martin Bugsy Goldstein. On the surface, he was timid,
Timid.
but underneath, he was capable of these incredible bursts of violence. Psychotic fits, as Cohen calls them. Harry Pep Strauss, he was the muscle, the enforcer. And Happy Mione, small guy physically, but he had this charisma, this real influence within the gang. And then you have guys like Dasher Abendando and Pittsburgh Phil. And Pittsburgh Phil, he had this really messed up way of looking at things. He saw contract killing as like a stepping stone, seasoning, he called it, for a bigger career in crime.
Seasoning. Wow. That's really disturbing.
Like their whole moral compass was just totally warped.
Absolutely.
So how did Murder, Inc. actually operate? Well, they were essentially contract killers for the bigger syndicate.
Yeah.
They had a retainer, but they also got bonuses for bigger hits. It was a business, plain and simple.
It really shows you how organized they were, though.
Right.
Like, they weren't just random thugs.
Right. They planned everything meticulously. Used stolen cars, had ways of getting rid of bodies. The book mentions the killing of Puggy Feinstein. He was strangled.
Jeez.
And their war with the Williamsburg gang, led by Joey Amberg, it was brutal. They went to extreme lengths to protect their turf.
It was a different world back then.
Okay, so let's talk about Louis Lepke Buchalter. Remember, he was the guy who always hung out in that diner. His story is really something. One of 14 children, Russian Jewish immigrants. Started small-time, petty crime. But he worked his way up. Got control of labor unions, started running protection rackets.
Smart move. Control the unions, you control a lot of money. And fear.
Right. And Lepke, he was ambitious. And like any smart gangster, he knew he had to get rid of his rivals.
Yeah.
Little Augie Fane was a problem, so Lepke had him taken care of. And that ambition is what leads him to Murder, Inc. He teams up with Abe Reels, and they become this, like, unstoppable force.
Yeah, Lipke and Realist, that was a bad combination if you were on their bad side.
But like all good things, eventually comes to an end. And in this case, the end comes in the form of Thomas Dewey. He was a prosecutor, and he was determined to take down organized crime.
Dewey was a force of nature, man. He wasn't messing around.
Right. His early cases, guys like Waxy Gordon, they were all about more than just getting convictions. Dewey wanted to expose these guys, humiliate them, show the world they weren't untouchable. And then he sets his sights on Dutch Schultz. Now, Schultz was a different animal, uh, more volatile. He actually tried to have Dewey killed.
Tried to have him killed.
Yeah, but the syndicate, they shut it down. They knew that killing a prosecutor like Dewey would bring the whole world down on them.
Smart. They weren't stupid.
No. And Schultz, well, he ended up dead anyway, a victim of the life he chose.
So what happened to Lepke?
Well, Dewey's strategy, going after the bosses, it worked. He got Lucky Luciano convicted on prostitution charges. It wasn't Luciano's biggest crime, but it was enough. And it sent a message. And it's interesting, Meyer Lansky and Lepke, they both saw what happened to Luciano, but they drew different lessons. Lansky, he seemed to learn to stay in the shadows, keep a low profile. But Lepke, he went on the run, became a fugitive.
Wow.
And his surrender, it's a whole other story. It involved Walter Winchell, the columnist, and J. Edgar Hoover himself.
No kidding.
Yeah, crazy, right. But the real turning point for Murder, Inc., it came when Abe Relis, Kid Twist, he decided to flip, turn state's evidence.
Whoa. That's huge.
It was a total betrayal. It sent shockwaves through the whole underworld. Nobody knew who he would rat on next.
Yeah.
And then there's his death. Still a mystery to this day. He was in police custody at the Half Moon Hotel, and he supposedly fell out of a window.
Fell? Or was he pushed?
Exactly. Was it an escape attempt gone wrong? Did other gangsters get to him? Was it corrupt cops? We still don't know.
I bet there are a lot of theories out there.
Oh, yeah. But even though Riley's died, his testimony, it led to a whole bunch of convictions. Goldstein, Strauss, Mione, Abendando, they were all executed. Charlie Workman, he went to prison. And Lepke, after his trial, he was executed in 1944, went to the chair, still acting like a tough guy.
Wow. So Murder Incorporated, that was the end of the line for them.
Pretty much. And it's fascinating, right? Like, over time, the way we look at these Jewish gangsters, it's changed. Back then, they were figures of fear. But now, in some ways, they've become almost legendary.
Yeah. It's strange how that happens. The passage of time, it can, like, soften the edges.
Cohen talks about how these gangsters were, in a way, connected to the whole immigrant experience. For some Jewish people, these tough guys, they represented strength, self-reliance, this idea of like making it in a new world. He even talks about this image of a "don't fuck with me" wall replacing the Wailing Wall.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah. It's like they wanted a different kind of Jewish identity in America. Not just about being persecuted, but about being strong, even if that meant, breaking the rules.
It's complicated, right?
Oh, absolutely. And then there's this whole other layer of complexity. Some of these Jewish gangsters, the same ones who were involved in all these crimes, they were also the ones fighting against pro-Nazi groups in America before World War II.
Right.
It's like good and bad all mixed up.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah. And then you have guys like Meyer Lansky, who managed to, in a way, blend in with mainstream society later on. And Cohen himself, he talks about his own family's connection to all of this and how Jewish identity in America has evolved since then. It's a long, complicated story.
It makes you think, like how much has really changed.
Yeah. So let's recap. We've gone deep, deep, deep into the world of Jewish gangsters in New York City. From those early days of like street brawls and gambling to the rise of Murder Incorporated. We've seen their motivations, their ambitions, their brutality, and we've seen their downfall.
It's a story of survival, of ambition, of violence, and it's a reminder that history is always more complicated than it seems on the surface.
Right. So here's something to think about. How do the stories we tell, and the stories we don't tell, shape how we see the world, past and present? What other forgotten histories are out there, waiting to be uncovered?
It makes you wonder what else is hidden just beneath the surface.
Exactly. And on that note, keep diving, deep divers. We'll see you next time.